Hi, and welcome to another podcast in the Winning Teams series. And today's guest is a double-hander, hailing all the way from the UK. It's Lizzie Evenden and Matt Spencer, who are the owners of the Business Speakeasy. And this will be really interesting for anybody who is fascinated or challenged by effective communication in their organization. And let's be honest, which organization is not challenged by that? Because we know that, poor communication is really costing us. And Matt and Lizzie have really put a figure on that. And they're saying in an organization of about 100 people, it can be as high as £500,000 sterling. So convert that into the euro currency, you'll see it's a very, very big number. And then if you kind of grow the numbers of the staff, it grows proportionately. So we really, really know that we need to do something to eliminate and reduce the cost of that poor and ineffective communication. And what you learn today in this podcast episode, they break into three areas. One is the art of presentation. That one thing that people would prefer to die rather than do. But they have a really, really kind of unusual take on that and approach to that, and it really is not the usual presentation as they say themselves. And the second is a very unheralded art of effective facilitation and the importance of facilitation in an organization and how you can really, really be good at that. And the third area is the whole, the way you approach meetings, the meeting design, how you actually run meetings. So I think, this session is really, really valuable for anybody who wants to make a step change in terms of effective communication. So if you want more resources and plenty of other podcasts and plenty of resources and videos, go to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com. But in the meantime, let's move over to the interview with Lizzie and Matt. Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is a double-hander where we have Lizzie Evenden and Matt Spencer, who are the founders of the Business Speakeasy. They've been in the training and development and coaching world for a long, long time. They're also the authors of the Not the Usual Presentation Skills. So Liz and Matt, you're very welcome here today. Thank you for coming along.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, John. Good to be here.
No, it's a real pleasure. You make a very, very big promise in the sense that you actually say that you will help companies create a culture of effective communication in your business. And that is a big promise because every organization that I have ever worked in or worked with, none of them have put their hand up and say, we're brilliant at communication. In fact, they tend to say quite the opposite. So how do you make that bold promise and how do you live to it?
Well, I think firstly, John, I think a lot of companies try and straitjacket their people when it comes to communication. They try and dictate how things are going to be done. And that might work for some people, but we're all individuals, so it's not going to work for everyone at the same time.
And to your point, John, I think we survey every single group and individual that we work with on how effective they find their meetings. People on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I don't really know what I'm doing in most of the meetings I'm in. It's a complete waste of my time. And 10 is every second of every meeting I go to is a good use of my time. And the average score we get back, and we've asked probably thousands of people this question by now, is around 6 out of 10. If we're on a good day, 5 to 6 out of 10. And for us, that kind of sums up the issue because do you know what? People and companies are settling for 6 out of 10 effectiveness on meetings.
Yeah.
And that's such a shame. And so for us, the way that you start to shift the culture of communication in your business, and meetings are a really good example of communication in your business and how it's working, is you start with small stuff and habits and practices that people can change on a daily basis, because that's how cultures change.
Yeah, because it's interesting. And just to kind of reaffirm what you're saying there, we gather a lot of data when we're working with teams. So we gather a lot of data from teams in terms of, various ways of how they're functioning. But one of the fascinating pieces of data that we got is that our data is showing, and again, it's coming back to what you're talking about in terms of meetings and collaboration, that teams are losing 1.9 days per week due to poor collaboration. So that's actually just reaffirming what you have said there. And it is, when you actually try and monetize that, and I'm not trying to monetize everything, but if you do put a kind of a number to that, that is an enormous cost and loss to an organization. Oh, you have?
We've done the math, John.
We did the maths because we were horrified by that as well. And yeah, our numbers tally quite closely, don't they? And we worked out that if you have a team of 100 people working in a kind of typical blue chip, it will be costing you somewhere around 400 to 500,000 pounds in salaries alone in a year. Wasted money.
That is scary. So, okay, so if we accept that organizations have the problem, so, I am the owner, I'm the CEO of the organization, and I accept the stats that, we're talking about here, and I know that it's not good. I bring you guys in, what do you actually do to make it effective?
So there are 3 different ways in which we work with people in businesses. So, and they're based around the 3 different types of interactions that people generally tend to have. So first and foremost, we do what we call not your usual presentation skills training. So this is to help individuals to get their message across effectively and in a way that people can actually be interested in without having to use PowerPoint in any situation. So because PowerPoint's a scourge as far as we're concerned to effective communication. So that's kind of the first thing, is working with individuals around how they communicate and present their points and their ideas and get their points across.
The next way is around helping the people who are the go-to facilitators in the business. So the ones that, if there's a big meeting needs to be running or a workshop, they're often individuals who for some reason have found themselves being good at being in a room and communicating or getting people to where they need to be, but they've had little training and no help and no support. It's not even seen as a serious business skill quite often. It's just something you're lucky to have in the organization. We celebrate these people, and we help them be even better at how they take people on the journey and help them unpick what it is they're doing naturally that allows them to do that over and above other people.
And then the third way is meeting design and mentoring. So when people hear that, they often think, oh, you're going to give us a list of rules to stick on the wall, but that's not what we do. What we do is work with an organization, and ideally we work with them in a long-term partnership and work with anybody in that organization who is planning or designing a meeting of more than 8 people for more than half a day, because that's when you start to get into lost cost and wasted salary and wasted time. We help them get clear, we mentor them to get clear about the objectives of that meeting, and we co-create with them a meeting design that we know they can lead and facilitate. We coach them to facilitate and lead that meeting, and then we review it with them afterwards. Yeah. So as you go through the course of the year, the different people who are running meetings are getting that experience and that training, but based live on the meetings they actually have. So
can I bring you back to the presentation skills? Because I'm really interested in what you're talking about there, because the immediate image of, when you talk about presentation skills, you have this image of somebody standing at the top of a room with a clicker in their hand and a screen behind them, and perhaps even a podium in front of them if it's
love a podium.
Love a podium.
No reason. Yeah.
So and of course people say that it's the thing that people are second most afraid of after death or something like that. But what is it that you do differently? I mean, I've now given a picture of what the kind of the classic situation is. How do you change that setup, and how do you get people to work within the setup that you create?
There's a couple of things going on there, John. The first thing is we knock that picture off its pedestal very early on, because that is often the picture people create for themselves in their heads of what a presentation is, and we don't think that is a presentation. We think that's just leading us astray and giving the art of presenting or communicating or actually just having a conversation a bad name. And the pressure, what stops people communicating effectively and brilliantly with each other, it's actually the internal pressure from within. It's not the outlying variables in the room. It's your own head. It's what you're telling yourself about what you should and shouldn't be doing. And in fact, if all your effort, your brain energy is being used on what I should and shouldn't be doing, then you're not paying attention to what's going on in the room. So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that you don't stand up and say your best words or deliver the speech you want to or deliver the presentation you want to. You're too busy worrying about what people are thinking Am I getting my words right? Oh no, look on page 45 of 5,000 PowerPoint slides, there's a spelling mistake, and tripping yourself up over those kind of things. What we find is the content's the easy bit. It's actually getting you right in the room is the harder bit. And that's kind of where we start. It's getting you right in the room.
And do you advocate using slides, or do you say don't use slides?
No,
we're agnostic to that.
We don't mind.
When we train, we don't use PowerPoint. We use flip charts and physical 3D materials to engage people with content. Hand-drawn flip charts, I might say, which we prep every time for our trainees, and they always go, "Do you write these every time?" And we say yes, because it engages us with the content.
I've got flip chart elbow. I'm not sure it's a common condition.
The facilitated condition, but absolutely, if people want to use PowerPoint, then we won't tell them not to. We don't train use of PowerPoint. So what we focus on in terms of content, once we've got to the point where you're clear on what your own communication superpowers are, and also you know how to get into flow, which is understanding a bit of neuro-linguistic programming, a bit of brain science, then how do you bring your content to life in ways that are going to engage all of your audience? Because not everybody responds to words on a screen. Some people need an experience, some people need pictures, and sometimes PowerPoint isn't the best way to do that. So we do aim to get people a bit more confident to go ahead without PowerPoint, if possible.
And when you look at presentations is a kind of an umbrella term, because, you know, there are different types of presentations. There are presentations where you want to engage people, motivate people, excite people, whatever else. There's other presentations where you're sharing information, or there's other presentations where you're pitching and selling. How do you differentiate between, okay, well, you do this in one and you do that in another, or do you?
I think it's more about principles, John, to be honest. There seems to be some unwritten rules about any kind of form of communication, whether it's a pitch or a presentation that goes on the lines of it has to be one to many. You can't move people around halfway through. All these variables that you could actually play with, depending on what the messages you're trying to get across or what you're trying to achieve. For us, it all starts with, what are you trying to achieve? And therefore plan to get there, regardless of what it is.
Yeah, so it's exactly that. For us, in the book, there's a worksheet which helps people work through all of the sort of 4 sets of principles that we have to think. And one of the places to think is about your audience. Where are they at the start? Where do you want them to be at the finish? And so knowing the journey that they need to go on, how can you make that as engaging and compelling for them as possible? So for us, definitely, you might take a different approach when you're selling to when you're trying to, when you're pitching to when you're trying to influence, but there's not one set of rules that applies to those situations. It really depends on all of the context, yourself, your audience, the physical environment you're in, what's going on in the context at the time.
For example, John, whenever you have a room of people and no one, doesn't matter what your ambition is, when you start, no one is in the room, because everyone's in their own context. They're still in the last meeting, they're still in their phone mentally, they're still in their social media feed, they're still worrying about what they're going to have for tea or the conversation they've got to have with a colleague later on. And so regardless of what your ambition is, one of the big principles around your audience is understanding that actually there's things you've got to do up front of any interaction that gets people in the room. Yes, they're there physically, but you need them in there mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally.
And how do you get them to do that, Matt? I mean, because I agree with you. People are kind of, their heads are in different places. So is one of the kind of the key things when you're starting a presentation how you start, and is there do you have a kind of a process or a formula or a recommendation of how you actually go about doing that?
Yes, John.
We do. We have a principle, and we have a kind of set of steps that we know work and that people can play with. But the big principle is slow down. Slow down at the start, because you'll be able to speed up later if you get all the brains in the room into the same gear to do the right task that you need them to do, whether that's listening to a piece of influencing, or whether that's assessing a load of options so you can take a decision later, or whether that's having a creative, innovative workshop. It takes some time for the brains to get in the right place. So the principle we help people to understand is it's worth taking some time. And we mean some time. I mean, at the start of an hour, we would take 10 minutes to slow down and do some stuff to get everyone in the room into the same gear. And that's the biggest principle, I think, that is missed the most in meetings and interactions at work.
And when you talk about that, Liz, are you talking about that you actually have started your presentation, or you're doing some sort of warm up?
Yeah, yes and no. So it is, for us, it is absolutely part of the presentation. It's
integral.
It's integral. Some of the stuff you do. So this is things like giving the people in your audience a chance to say something in the room, even if with a big audience, it's to their neighbour. Okay. That can be about the topic you're going to present on. You're starting to connect them to the topic. You might be dropping in some little facts and some little nuggets of information, but you're not starting your presentation proper, if you like, really, until you've got everybody ready to hear and engage fully.
Okay, so give me an example of what you're talking about there, just so that I'm really clear about what you might do in a presentation.
Okay, well, if we were doing a presentation about presentation skills, for example, we would say hello and welcome everyone into the room. And then the first thing we'd do, not share an agenda or go, here's what's happening and here's when the breaks are. We'd go, right, everyone, stand up, come over here and line yourself up on a spectrum, an imaginary spectrum around your attitude towards presenting, standing in a room and talking to people. So one end is love it, it's my passion, happy to do it. The other end is vomit. It's my worst fear. In fact, being in this room right now with you, Liz and Matt, I'm kind of crying inside. And we say, line yourselves up, and they'll line themselves up, and we'll then say, right, turn to the person next to you and just discuss why you're there, what's going on for you. At this point, we might be going for 5-10 minutes. We've said about 2 sentences. They've been filling up all the space, talking to each other. No one's been exposed, but then now their brains have had to go, right, I'm now standing up. I wasn't expecting that. I'm talking about the subject matter at hand. So even if I've been sent here by a boss or someone for self-improvement, I've now got to connect why I'm actually here, what I'm about. Right. And we give a chance to people to kind of go, I hate this stuff, and to say it out loud. And whatever subject you're either teaching or a subject you're presenting around, people are going to have reactions to it, and it's good to get that out early and find out what's going on in the room, for example.
So yeah, lineups are great because you can use those for knowledge about a topic as well. I remember when I worked at Unilever for the first 8 years of my corporate life, and you'd quite often be presenting to a group, some of whom you didn't know, about a topic which was quite specialist. And so getting people to line up and place themselves in order of how much I know about this topic or how many presentations I've seen before on these numbers gives you a really good feel as well as a presenter. Right. Where do I pitch this? So it's kind of, there's a two-way thing going on now. I'm now in a dialogue, and I can start to adjust what I'm going to share and how I share it based on what people have done to get themselves into the subject and in the room.
I love that. I by the way, I will use that.
You're welcome, John.
Telling you in advance. Because, okay, we're talking about communication and presentation and one, and obviously that's one that talk about, but one that I feel is a very undervalued or underrated and really misunderstood is the other one you're talking about, which is facilitating.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about that and what makes a good facilitator a poor facilitator?
Well, first of all, John, can I talk about the loneliness of being a facilitator? Which is, these people often don't have a support network around them because they are outliers. They do have this kind of natural ability to do something, but have never been taught it, and they don't tend to be lots of them in any given business. In our experience.
And it's, as you said, John, because it's often underappreciated as a skill set, what we find is, we got to know lots of facilitators over the years working on the creativity and innovation side of things, and we are facilitators ourselves. And what we've learned is that when you're able to do something naturally that other people don't appreciate the skill in, then people don't actually realize how much effort and energy it might be taking you in order to be either a good or a bad facilitator. Just being willing to be a facilitator means that you end up doing a whole lot of work behind the scenes people don't see. So that's kind of why we've started on this track of really wanting to support facilitators and help them to hone their craft more.
But I love your question, John, about good and bad, because I think there are some clear things that bad facilitators show the room. I think one of the things a bad facilitator has is a real ego. So they want to be the star of the show. They're worrying about how funny they're being. They're worried about how they're looking, how smart and clever they're being with their words. And actually, that's not the job of the facilitator. And I'm not talking about being neutral. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's about, actually, it's not about you. Your job is to get the people in the room where they need to be. It doesn't mean you do that without personality. But it doesn't mean you've got to be the perfect facilitator. In fact, I deliberately muck things up all the time just to show that I'm not perfect. Actually, the moment it just happens naturally for me, luckily.
You don't have to
I
try.
don't have to try.
Yeah, I don't
the
work
moment-
hard at that at all. That just happens to me.
But the moment we work with people who go, oh, I've got to do this bit because this is the funny bit at the start, or oh, I've got to say these clever things, and we go, no, that's actually what you don't need to be doing. You need to have the plan. You need to show people that you know what's going to be going on, however that looks for you.
And you need to believe that you are the right person to be at the front of the room, leading the group, doing that particular thing. And there's a ton of stuff behind that around getting into flow and connecting with the agenda and with how you're feeling and how you're physically and all of that. But really, I think a great facilitator is someone who fully believes that they're in the right place, doing the right thing, and in service of the people in the room and the agenda in the room.
Because I think that's really the really important thing, isn't it? Because I always think that, I mean, obviously, we all do similar work, and I facilitate a lot of workshops, and I always think that, if you're the star of the day, you've just been a lousy facilitator.
Correct. Yes.
And it's a bit like, if you're looking at a football match and you end up talking about the referee afterwards, then it's been a poor referee. And you really should almost not notice the facilitator. And I would also argue that as a facilitator, I work hardest when I'm not speaking, because you're looking at what's happening in the room.
We talk about the gaps in between, John. Exactly. It's the stuff in between. The doing is an important bit. It's actually when you're not on. Most people think that's the bit's important.
When you're speaking.
It's not. It's actually what you're doing all around. And I've seen facilitators who, when they're not talking or they're not part of the program, they'll be checking messages. They'll be looking at email, and I'm going, how can you? This is important. This is the craft of facilitation. Tuning into the energy in the room, tuning to what's required. Where could I go and help someone if someone's in trouble, or where do I need to actively step back? I think often people have an on and an off button when it comes to facilitation. You're either on, which means it's you standing up and directional and setting the scene, or it's off. It's not my role, and I don't think there is an on and an off. I think if you're in the room, you're always on. You should be shattered after a good day facilitating, even if you've only talked for half an hour of it. It's not about the chat. It's about, as you say, it's the stuff in between.
And I think it's so important that you trust your own gut, that if if you're observing and you see, somebody on one side of the room says something, and even though somebody on the other side of the room didn't say anything, but you see a reaction.
Yes.
Is that you trust your gut and be confident enough to follow it, rather than being worried, am I going off track?
Agreed. And that connects to me for the belief, with the belief that I'm the right person to be leading this agenda. And that means, in order to trust your gut and to notice those things, that means, I think, to be a great facilitator, you need to be able to be absolutely fully present in the moment, because you need to be able to read all of the stuff that's going on around you and interactions between people. And I mean, it's difficult to facilitate a group of people. We would say about 12 people is about the most we work as a pair. Any pair can facilitate well, but we do work with bigger groups. But you need to be absolutely present in order to read all of the stuff that's going on subconsciously, get all of those body language signs from people, and as well as that, be thinking ahead and working out, where are we going next? There's a bit of your brain going, where are we going next? Is this helping us get there? Are we going to need to divert? Do I need to bring a different tool out? What's the dynamic between those two people over there? Does anybody need the loo? Do we need a break yet? All of those things have to be going on at once. And you can only do that when you're fully consciously present.
You're like an octopus.
Yes.
That's a good description.
I think we've listed down something like 38 arms you actually need. But you can only have all those arms and all that awareness if you're absolutely in the zone, in that flow zone, with your full brain working. You're not thinking about something went wrong earlier. You're not thinking about what's going on after the session. You're just in the moment and constantly. It's a bit like do you do a bit of curling, John? Do you like a bit of
yes.
We often talk about facilitation. It's a bit like curling, actually. You set off the what is it, a puck, a stone, in the right direction with all the navigation it needs. But then all the time, every now and again, you just need that little brush here and there, just to make sure you keep on course. You keep on course, and you can never let up. Doing that to get the stone to the aim, to the target.
And it's also kind of knowing. I know certainly when I started facilitating, I felt a little bit kind of tied to the agenda. But then you actually learn, no, that's just a kind of a guideline. You really want to figure out what is the overall objective, and being fluid about that, and allowing people to kind of say what they need to say, because people, when they get cut off, they just switch off.
Completely agree. And so almost never when we're facilitating do we run the plan that we created. It always diverts. It's different when you're training. Even with training, you flex the amount of focus because each group is different, but certainly in facilitating a group.
Yeah, it's the old story. If you want to make God laugh, make a plan.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it is true. But just to kind of move on to the effective meeting, because some people actually confuse being a facilitator and running effective meetings, and they are different.
Yeah, I think there's a deep skill around facilitation, which is not necessary in order to run great meetings. They're probably the tip of an iceberg and the depth of an iceberg. Yeah. And they're certainly in the same direction, which is why we look at both. But I don't think you need to be a trained facilitator to run a great meeting.
Why do you think that we, and I'm so talking the broad we, why is it that in organizations we tolerate rubbish meetings?
Yeah, I know. I have a theory on this. I think that a lot of the time in organizations, particularly in big organizations, I think human beings are on autopilot.
Yeah.
And kind of almost sleepwalking, coping their way through elements of the day. And if there is, there's a sense of powerlessness to change a way things work. So, I mean, the number of conversations we've had with people about how are the meetings where you work, and it's never a positive conversation.
No.
But yet people aren't doing anything about it.
And I think that's the interesting thing, because very often if you actually, kind of challenge it and kind of say, well, and they say, well, that's the way meetings are. And you challenge it and say, well, why don't you do something about it?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, I think, John, expectations are now very, very low for meetings. So as long as they get through without some sort of car crash, then I think it's a
victory.
It's a victory. And also that no one owns. I mean, it's really interesting having worked with lots of learning professionals and people looking to help their culture. The meetings fall between responsibility. There is no head of meetings in a business because everyone has them. It's almost like, because they're so ubiquitous, no one actually owns them. So when we go and talk to people, it's like, I wish we could do something around here, and everyone kind of looks at each other. No one, who's head of meetings? Who would we go to for some training or some help around this? It's actually very interesting. It's kind of not on the agenda because it's just too big.
And then what has happened is, because that has been, as we've just been saying, expectations are low and standards are low, you then have a generation or several generations probably of people who've come into the workplace and they've learned from people who've learned to run bad meetings. And so that means that it's perpetuated.
That's true. And it's kind of how we do things around here, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's dreadful, but I sort of like, there is also, I might be getting a bit deep and psychological now, but I do think there's also a sense of validation. Let's face it, it says now in social media that we're all sitting there with imposter syndrome all the time, and lots of us are. And I think being physically present in a gathering of other people who are also employed by this company can sometimes be, I'm not accusing everybody of listening to this podcast of having this, but sometimes be a way of feeling valid within an organization. It's a valid way of spending my time, and work is meetings, right? So it's okay. I'm doing my job. I'm not an imposter.
And I think very often also there's a reluctance to kind of either question or ask the stupid question or say, I don't understand that.
Exactly.
We're designed for an easy life because we want to survive. It's it's our brains. It's the way we've developed. The reason we're actually working in a business as an individual is because our ancestors knew when to fight and when to run away. Yeah. And we're about safety. So if everyone else is kind of accepting it, then I'm going to accept it too. Where's the value for me in rocking the boat right now? It's a bit like one of the things businesses can do really quickly is at the end of every meeting, just do some feedback with each other. What was great about that meeting, how we ran it, not the content. and what can we do better next time? But again, you say that to someone and they hear the word feedback and they run a mile. It's like, I'm not going to do any feedback. There's no value in that for me.
And then when we actually get people to do that, it's one of the most useful conversations we've ever had.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if people listening to this now, in terms of meetings, because I said the kind of meetings are the bane of everybody's life, but in terms of meetings, give them 3 things that they could actually go away and do today to make the next meeting they have more productive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I start with
one?
I've
yes,
got one from a big hobby horse.
Yeah.
So this is something we call navigating, and that is just being really clear to take the time at the start to let people know not just what, if you're leading the meeting, not just what is going to happen, not just what is on the agenda, but what kind of behavior does this agenda require? Is this a decision-making meeting? So we all need to listen and then we'll have a discussion later and we will be leaving with some decisions. Or is it an exploratory meeting, in which case we need to ask lots of questions and be open and curious, for example. And that is something that if you do it at the start, and if you as the leader of the meeting put that forward, then and into that you can also include, if you want, we need everybody to focus, so we're going to need you to put mobile phones away and not have laptops open. If those behaviors start to slip, if you've called it at the beginning, it's much easier to just go, oh, hey Pete, do you mind, we did say at the beginning we were going to put our mobile phones away. Makes it much less of an issue to deal with. So that would be my first tip. It would be, think about what kind of behavior do you need in the meeting, what might go wrong, and therefore call positively for that behavior at the beginning, as well as having an agenda.
Great.
My next one would be something you mentioned earlier, which is, and it links to what Liz was just saying, around slow down to speed up. And very deliberately tell people why you're slowing down to speed up. It's around getting everyone's brain in the room, making sure people can do the focusing, taking time to explain what the process is going to be. Even if you've only got 30 minutes, be very clear and studied, and then get them to do something that breaks their pattern of thinking. Something's just a little bit different. We do it naturally when we go down the pub, John, or when we meet our friends in the street. You say, how are you? What have you been doing? What's going on in your life? Get them just to have a chat about something that's not to do with the topic, and just get them relaxing, talking to each other.
As human beings.
As human beings, yeah. Make everyone a human, not the business person trying to be the smartest and the cleverest person in the room. By the way, if you're ever trying to be the smartest and cleverest person in any room, you are not being the smartest and cleverest person.
That's for sure.
Absolute fact, which is lucky because I never am.
And tip number 3, I'm going to go for basically get the people, especially if it's a meeting where there's a lot of communication going on and sharing. I think it's really important that everyone in the room has some skin in the game and knows what they're there for. And so having, like we talked about earlier, either a lineup of kind of how much do you know about this topic, or indeed asking people to turn to a neighbour and have a short conversation about what would good look like at the end of this meeting. Great. For me, for us, and then hear that back from the pairs so that everybody's got that in the room, because once it's said out loud, we can all move towards it as a group.
That's great. That's super. I love that. Listen, we could talk for a long time. And listen, I'm sorry I've taken up more of your time than I said I would, but this has been just really great stuff. Before I actually get into asking where people can get in touch with you, because I know people will want to do so. Question I ask everybody, and if I can ask the two of you, a book that has had an impact upon you, whether it's recent or in the distant past. Liz, can I go to you first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to tell you my favorite kind of business related book that I've read I've read it in the past year, and it's by a guy called Benjamin Hardy, and it's called Willpower Doesn't Work. And it's just, for me, it's a brilliant book because it really challenges that whole philosophy of behavior change. You know, the philosophy that says, if you want to start a new habit, just do it for 28 days and then it'll become a habit. Willpower Doesn't Work takes the proposition that is not the way to change a habit. Actually, repetition isn't the way. What you need to do if you want to adopt a new habit is you need to adapt your environment to make the new habit inevitable. And that was groundbreaking for me in how we think about helping people learn. It's a brilliant book, really worth a read.
I haven't come across that, so that's one for the list. Matt, how about you?
I think all you and all your listeners will know this one. It's Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers.
Oh yeah, I love it.
which is just full of great principles. And I think, the thing that sticks with me, and I'm sure a lot of people, is the 10,000 hours that sort of turns you from being a mortal into kind of a genius at what you're doing. I read it and I realized I've already done over 20,000 hours of facilitation. So no wonder I felt so comfortable on my feet. But then also I've used it. I think you can keep going further. I think you can do 1,000,000 hours and still not be as good as you can be. So I think you're only ever as good as the last hour you did. Yeah. That's kind of how I roll. I kind of bring the same energy and effort and focus to every meeting or presentation or facilitation, because that's how good you are, right?
Yeah, and I'd add to that, as long as you're always learning too.
Exactly.
If the moment you stop learning or think you know it all is the moment it all goes very wrong indeed.
It does go pear-shaped. Second question to ask both of you, Matt, I'll ask you first there. Daily rituals, do you have any, and what are they?
So daily rituals, I'm a music fiend, John. Music gets my soul going, it gets my mind going, it gets my body going. So I own over 10 record players. Wow. I have in all the rooms of my house. I carry vinyl to workshops, would you believe? And my ritual is nothing beats to get my mind focused and ready for the day or the session is hearing that needle hit the vinyl, that little hiss, and then something good start up. So that's my go-to.
And have you always been a vinyl man, or is that a recent conversion to it?
I've always been a vinyl man. My kitchen is now more vinyl than kitchen, much to the delight of my family, who can't actually get into my kitchen now. So
you fall into the category that if you keep something long enough, it'll come back into fashion.
It came back and people laughed at me for years, John.
Yes, I know.
Now who's laughing?
Yeah, exactly. Liz, how about you?
So my ritual is it's a time of day thing. It's more mornings are important, and you and I have mentioned before miracle mornings. That's not really what I'm talking about, although it's a great principle. There's far too much to do in a miracle morning, but I do something every morning to kind of get myself into flow. So some mornings that's exercise, some mornings that's meditation, some mornings that's reading something, some mornings that's taking time and really preparing a breakfast very carefully and mindfully, and eating it mindfully and carefully. As much as possible, I do those things outdoors. That's not always possible with weather, but yeah, that I would say that's my biggest daily ritual. When we're away, if we're actually away on site training, by the time Matt and I see each other at about sort of 7:38 in the training room, he knows I'll already have been for a run or been doing a meditation or whatever else it is.
And Matt has listened to the vinyl.
Yeah, and I'll share one other as well. The first thing I do when I'm in a room and we're set up is I take my shoes off. Yeah. I only facilitate in my socks because I feel far more connected to the earth and the world. It's like if I put my shoes back on, I don't know my words anymore, so I keep them off.
I love it. Listen, guys, this has been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's been full of loads of stuff for people to really learn and take away from. So where can they get in touch with you?
So they can check out our website, www.thebusinessspeakeasy.com. That means there's 3 S's in the middle, which all of the digital strategists tell us we shouldn't have done, but we did it anyway. So if you go there, then there's all of the usual ways to contact us straight from the website. You can also find us on LinkedIn. So we have a company page on LinkedIn, The Business Speakeasy.
And if you check Amazon in the next couple of weeks, the Not Your Usual Presentation Skills book, it'll be listed there with a beautiful purple cover.
Mid-September.
Sure. Fantastic. Listen, it has been I've thoroughly enjoyed it, guys. Let's do this again, and let's come back and talk more, because there's a lot more that we could share with the audience. So thank you to both of you, to Liz and to Matt. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, John. That was good fun. Thank you.